Hello, everyone, and welcome to a special edition of the Jake's Take with Jacob Elyachar Podcast. I'm your host, Jacob Elyachar, the chief content producer and writer at jakestake.com, a pop culture entertainment news website. If you're listening to our audio platforms, please give us a 5-star rating. Please download this episode and other episodes in my podcast library. It's a special edition because I'm very excited to talk to this lady. In 1970s, she spent 3 years walking 3,000 miles across the United States with her former husband. Their journey took center stage in National Geographic Magazine in August 1979. And for the first time in 40 years, she's telling her side of the story in a new book, So Long as It's Wild, Standing Strong After My Famous Walk. And that book has received praise from Connie Britton, Hilary Swank, and the one and only legendary Dolly Parton. So please help me welcome to the podcast, Barbara Jo Jenkins.
Quite an introduction.
Thank you so much, Barbara. It's a pleasure to meet you, and thank you so much for taking time on my schedule to talk to me. I really appreciate it.
Oh, of course. I'm happy to share fascinating stories, share my book, learn about you and your followers, and I'm just happy to be here.
Awesome. So let's get started, shall we?
Great.
So at the end of the 1970s, you and your former husband, Peter Jenkins, walked 3,000 miles across the country. What were some of the highlights from your first walk across the U.S.?
Well, Jacob, we left New Orleans the year of the bicentennial and walked from New Orleans all the way to the Pacific coast in Florence, Oregon. It was over 3,000 miles. It took 3 years. I carried about 35 pounds on my back. Peter carried more like 75 pounds. We slept in a tent. We walked 15 to 20 miles a day. I had lots of blisters. We had lots of great adventures, drama, dangerous experiences. But you asked me about some highlights. I'm going to tell you a couple of stories of real highlights walking across America. We were almost struck by lightning more than once. We walked through many storms, thunderstorms. We walked across Oregon, the coldest winter since 1919, and whiteouts and blizzards. But I'm going to tell you a story about when we walked across southeastern Colorado. At that time, back in the 1970s, this was from 1976 to 1979. And during that time, this was a very open and lawless territory. And so we entered Colorado. It was at the close of the day. It was a long and lonely road. There were no cars. And I loved this time of the day because it meant I could stop walking. I could take the weight off my back. I could finally sleep and rest. It was the cool part of the day. And I remember watching a jackrabbit hop across the sagebrush. I remember the sun was going down. It was a very quiet and meditative evening. And all of a sudden, I heard this car rumbling in the distance, and it was coming toward me. Well, Peter always walked quite a distance ahead of me, and that was for two reasons. I couldn't keep up, number one. Number two, he saw himself as a scout, and he was always sort of paving the way to make sure we were headed in the right direction, to look at the map. So he was the scout. And it didn't bother me. I had to just keep walking, put one foot in front of the other. So I heard this car rumbling in the background. And all of a sudden it came up next to me, and inside were 3 drunk men. And the driver, his eyes were glassy and bloodshot. He had a can of beer in one hand and his arm out the window trying to grab me. And he yelled at me and he said, hey, come get in the car. And of course, this had never happened to me before. And I could tell these men were just drunk and going to be a problem. The driver had long, shiny blue-black hair. He wore a red bandana. He looked like he might have been part Indian, part Hispanic. I wasn't sure. The other men I couldn't really see. I just kept my head down, kept walking. Peter saw what was going on, turned around, and started walking back toward me because he knew this was dangerous. And so I just kept walking. They kept shouting, and they started shouting obscenities, and they started trying to grab me to get me in the car with them. Well, Peter got to the car, and all we had was our giant golfing umbrellas, which were like a spear or a weapon. And Peter was a big man, a big, robust, very strong man. And these particular men were smaller men. Anyway, they continued to shout obscenities. They stopped, they rumbled the car, they backed it up, and they tried to run us over. 2 or 3 times they did this, shouting the whole time. Well, Peter and I jumped across the ravine and started running out in the sagebrush. Well, they tried to follow us and were screaming the whole time, "We're going to kill you. We're going to kill you." Well, about that time, off in the distance, we heard another car coming. And it was like, for us, it was like the cavalry was coming to rescue us. And when these drunk men saw another car coming, they sped back onto the road and peeled out, screaming they were going to come back and find us and kill us. Well, it was almost dark. So we huddled down in a little ravine in the sagebrush. It looks level from the road, but if you get out in that desert area, there are all kinds of gullies and ditches, and we found a low spot. We did not set up our tent. It was too dangerous. So we just rolled out our rubber mats, our bed mats, hoping we were not on top of a bed of rattlesnakes, and just sat there and waited until the moon came up and the night sounds, and it was quiet. It was a starlit night. The moon was shining bright across the desert, and all of a sudden we heard the rumble again. Here came that car of outlaws and renegades, and they were shining a spotlight all across the desert looking for us. We just laid low. We just were as still. I learned this is what animals do in the wild when they're being sought by a predator. They camouflage themselves and they freeze in place. If you can't run away, you just freeze. That's what we did. They went up and down that road probably 30 minutes or so looking for us, and then finally drove off into the night. Well, Peter asked me after we knew they were gone. He asked me, were you afraid? Were you afraid? And I said, well, I was going to try to take on the littlest one. And so the next morning at dawn, we got up early, just as the sun was coming up, and hiked 5 miles in to a little town village called San Luis, Colorado. At that time, it was about 500-600 people. We went straight to the sheriff's office. We told him what had happened. And he said, I know exactly who these guys are. He said, yes, he said, they are a band of renegades and outlaws out of the mountains around there. And he named the mountains. And he said, in fact, he held up a sawed-off shotgun and he said, this is all that they understand. And he had just shot and killed the ringleader of these outlaws the week before. And he said, you are lucky to be alive. So needless to say, that night we camped on the lawn of the sheriff's office there in town. But that's one of many adventures walking across America for 3 years.
Well, first of all, I got to say, Thank goodness you survived. Thank goodness all that. And I got to say, that's an incredible story. Now, you went from to, like as I was prepping for our conversation, you went from being a best-selling author to losing it all.
Yes. Well, this book, So Long as It's Wild, Standing Strong After My Famous Walk Across America. It took me 3 years to write this book, Jacob. I came out of 40 years of silence because I did not want to write it. It was my granddaughter who said to me, Yo-Yo, that's my name, Yo-Yo, Yo-Yo, did you really walk across America? And I knew then that if I didn't tell my story from my voice and how I experienced walking across America and the things that happened to me, that those stories would be lost and gone forever. You will read in this book how I was raised as a very poor hillbilly in the Ozarks of Missouri. My family, we did not have an indoor bathroom until I was about 12 years old. We were poor, but because I grew up in this culture and in this poverty, I knew what it was like to survive, to live without, to not have conveniences. So walking across America and living in a tent was not that much of a stretch for me. After we walked across America, it was a 3-year journey. Like I said, we ended in Florence, Oregon. We ended up being on the cover of National Geographic Magazine, which, by the way, became one of their most popular stories in the history of the magazine. This was August 1979. At that time, we lived outside of New Orleans, and I gave birth to our first child. I ended the walk across America 2 months pregnant with our first child. And you'll read all about that in my book, So Long as It's Wild. Well, we achieved, because we were on the cover of National Geographic, that opened every door of the universe. We had publishers contacting us, wanting us to write books, and there were speaking engagements. And so there was fame and fortune, and opportunities fell out of the sky. And so life went from living in a tent, walking 15, 20 miles a day, to almost being jet setters, trying to keep up with all that was happening. We had 3 beautiful children. We bought a big 200-acre farm in Middle Tennessee. And so I was living my dream. This was the richest that this poor hillbilly had ever been. But this is true for a lot of people who achieve fame and fortune quickly. And the travel, the fame, the fortune, there were lots of temptations. And Peter fell into a lot of temptations, which ultimately he broke his marriage vows, and ultimately our marriage crumbled. And I had to file for divorce. So then I spent all the years raising 3 children alone, kind of being thrown back into survival mode and finding my way. And so the book is not about divorce at all. The book is about how I grew up as a hillbilly, great adventures walking across America, and then rebuilding my life as a single parent. And so I had to overcome a lot of things to find my way. And there were some very lean and tough years, but I ultimately started a company and did very, very well. And my children are all grown. 2 of them have their own families. And then my oldest son, Jedediah Jenkins, is a New York Times best-selling author, and his new book is being released next month in November 2023, and it's called Mother Nature. And so anyway, that's a huge sweep. In fact, Publishers Weekly said in the industry, in the book industry, there are a couple of industry reviews that you hope you will get a good review. And one of those is the Library Journal. And the Library Journal said, if you liked Tara Westover's book called Educated, or if you liked Cheryl Strayed's book called Wild, you will be captivated by Barbara Jenkins' book, So Long as It's Wild. So that was a great endorsement and review. And then, of course, Publishers Weekly, which said that So Long as It's Wild is engrossing and a cinematic sweep. So I'm very proud of those reviews. And of course, as you said in the beginning, this book has received some wonderful reviews and endorsements from people like Dolly Parton, who actually said to me, she said, congratulations, Barbara, you've done it again by writing this book. And she said, I hope everyone is as inspired by this book as I am. Congratulations, Dolly Parton. And then, of course, go ahead.
And I got to say, Dolly's, but I'm so sorry, Dolly's, it's just amazing to have that kind of endorsement from Dolly.
Well, it's rare and it is a great blessing. I'll tell you how I got it, because every author on the planet would love to have her endorsement. But one of her backup singers, who's been with her about 35 years, is one of my very best friends. And so she was able to take the manuscript and ask Dolly to read it. So that was how that happened, because I don't know Dolly personally. I feel like I do because my friend has been with her so many years. But and then, of course, Hilary Swank. And Hilary Swank gave me a great review, and Connie Britton. And I have to tell you, those ladies gave me great endorsements. And that came through my son, Jedediah Jenkins, who knows all of these people.
Wow.
So it's connections. As you know, Jacob, connections. We all aren't so blessed to have all these celebrities in our back pocket. But coming out of 40 years of silence, let me tell you, one of the most powerful and sweetest reviews that I got that just meant so much to me, because it had been a long time since I'd had anything published. And the editorial review said this: the writing is stunning. It is like Margaret Wrinkle meets Mark Twain meets John Steinbeck.
Wow.
So that to me was certainly giving me the credibility and the endorsement that that every writer would love to have. So I'm very deeply thankful. But then beyond all those professional reviews, it's the reader who really matters. And I've been getting lots and lots of comments like I couldn't put the book down. I read it straight through. Amazing. Just so, that's where the rubber meets the road. Because, in any industry, you can get all kinds of pats on the back from other people in the industry. But what really matters is the audience, the readers, the people out there who really make the difference. And for those readers, I'm deeply grateful. And if you go on Amazon and search for So Long as It's Wild, I think it has about a 4.2 or 4.4 rating. So people are really giving it great reviews.
And that leads me to my next question, because you got to meet a lot of the readers on your book tour. So can you describe to my audience what some of the moments from the book tour that you enjoyed meeting fans, and what were some of the feedback that they received from you?
Well, we did, in the month of September, we did a road trip book tour. And We covered 6,000 miles. We started in Oxford, Mississippi, on a radio show called Thacker Mountain Radio. I loved it. It was a live audience. We had about 200 people in the audience, and the moderator interviewed me on stage, and it was fantastic. There were a lot of funny moments. People laughed, they clapped. It was great. And that was carried on public radio all across the South. We started in Oxford, Mississippi. We went on over to Texas, in Dallas and Amarillo, up into Colorado and in Denver and Fort Collins, on up into Salt Lake City, Boise, Idaho. We did 14 book events across this country. We ended in Eugene, Oregon, right an hour from the Pacific coast. And because my editor, who went with us on this tour, she had never seen the Pacific. So we took a little detour and drove on over to the Pacific at the very spot where Peter and I finished our walk across America. So it was a great moment. But we met many people, young and old. We met families. And I have posted a lot of the pictures on my website, BarbaraJoJenkins.com, and Joe is J-O, BarbaraJoJenkins.com. And you can go on there and see a lot of the people, their faces, and pictures of them from all across the country.
Awesome. So I want to talk to you about some of my audience represents the millennial generations and Generation Z. And thanks to Instagram, Twitter, and YouTube, many members of them want to become influencers and want to be in a digital world 24/7. So what advice would you share with them on how can they break free from the digital world?
Well, I think it's a balance, Jacob. And of course, if they're wanting to be an influencer, then breaking away is an important part, because you need to have something of value to influence. And you can't do that if you're hooked up to wires and a screen 24/7. It's important to build your life, to build a life with real people, with your feet on the ground, with real experiences. And then guess what? You've got something to share. But if you're just sitting in a technological virtual world, it really doesn't help anybody. And if you want to be an influencer, it's really about not what can they do for me, but what can I do that might be a blessing, it might be a help, it might be an influence on another person to help them along the way. And your generation, Jacob, is it's tough. It's very tough, because you have to make a concentrated decision to do that. Because everybody is glued to their phones, their computers, whatever, 24/7. And that's just not normal. It's just not normal. It's not healthy. It's not good. There are a lot of mental health studies coming out that are showing the detrimental effects of too much social media, too much internet. Now, I'm not saying don't use it, it's not great, because that's what we're doing right now, or otherwise it wouldn't be possible. But I think you've got to find a balance, and all of life needs to be a balance. Go sit on the porch and drink tea with a friend. Go for a walk. Take a friend and go shopping at the mall. Go to a movie. Do something where you are sort of finding yourself in the quiet, in spaces where you're not bombarded with 10,000 messages.
Absolutely, absolutely. And that brings me to my second to last question. If you had the opportunity to meet someone who wants to go on an adventure, but does not have any extravagant funding to pull it off, What advice would you share with them?
Well, I would say a lot of adventure boils down to your attitude. If you're an adventurous person, you are going to find adventure and excitement every day, anywhere you are. It can be in your own neighborhood, it can be at a local park, but just have an open mind, an open heart to look around you. And there are so many undiscovered things right under your feet that you just ignore, you don't see, but uh, just pray for eyes to see and ears to hear, because everything is there for the taking. It's just that we're so blinded and so absorbed in so many other things bombarding us. So you have to kind of get away, be still, and pray for these eyes to see and ears to hear, that your senses that you can absorb, because excitement and adventure, I mean, even at my age, every day is exciting, adventurous. I wake up happy. I have a happy heart. I have a happy mind. I have a happy life. But every day is an adventure. I'm not moaning and groaning, oh, how miserable, how this, how that. No, that you're not going to find excitement or adventure if you're murmuring all the time. You're going to find excitement and adventure when you have an open heart and an uncritical heart. Now, that doesn't mean you can't be discerning, but that you are open to seeing new things around you and enjoying them. And so that would be my advice, because you don't need a lot of money. You don't need a lot of money to do this.
Awesome. All right, last question. Where can my audience connect with you on social media, and where can they find So Long as It's Wild, standing strong after my famous walk?
Well, Jacob, thank you for asking. This book is a page turner. It has many twists and turns. It reads more like a novel than a memoir. In fact, I've even had one company contact me about the film and movie rights. Well, we'll see. That's a long shot, but we'll see. You can buy So Long as It's Wild on Amazon, Books a Million, Barnes and Noble, any of the bookstores, wherever you get your books, it's there. You can, there are, let me see now, there are some bookstores. Well, no, there's a Missouri River Festival this weekend up in Omaha, Nebraska, that's having a big festival, and they have some signed copies, but a lot of your readers may not be there. But you can get So Long as It's Wild at any bookstore. You can contact me on my website, BarbaraJoJenkins.com. That's Barbara, Barbara, Jo, J-O, Jenkins, Jenkins.com. Or you can follow me on Instagram at Barbara Jenkins Writer. And I'd love to hear from you. I'd love to connect with your generation. In fact, I have a lot of readers in your generation. And I think people your age, Jacob, you're looking for more than just a computer screen, aren't you?
Absolutely, absolutely. Absolutely. And here's the thing, guys. If you miss an episode of the Jake's Take with Jacob Elyachar podcast, head over to Jake's Take with Jacob Elyachar, head over to jakes-take.com and visit our paid channels on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, Spreaker. And don't forget to connect with me at Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, formerly known as X, formerly known as Twitter, and YouTube, Jacob Elyachar, JACOBELYACHAR. Barbara Jo, was a privilege to talk with you.
Thank you, Jacob. It was so nice to meet you and talk with you.
All right, guys. Thank you so much for your time. Thank you so much for listening. Until next time, have a great one, everybody. Goodbye.